what Lindsey Graham is saying is true. That had to be even worse news today for Donald Trump than losing another House seat in Maine, because as of today, according to Lindsey Graham, Matthew Whitaker doesn't believe anything is being done wrong with the Mueller investigation. That would logically mean that Matthew Whitaker, as of today, has no intention and has no right or reason to fire Robert Mueller, and no intention of limiting the investigation in any way. Leading off our discussion now, Lisa Graves, former chief counsel for nominations for the Democrats in the Senate Judiciary Committee. She was Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Justice Department. Matthew Miller, former spokesperson for Attorney General Eric Holder, an MSNBC contributor, and Jill Wine-Banks, the former Assistant Watergate Special Prosecutor and an MSNBC legal contributor. And Jill, there's a big if here, but if Lindsey Graham is telling the truth, which I think is the biggest if I've used in a long time, that's a very good report of his conversation with Matthew Whitaker today.
It would be very encouraging to anyone who cares about justice, but very discouraging to Donald Trump, and could certainly explain his foul mood today if he thinks that he's not being protected by the man he put in to protect him. Then he would be very upset. And I would be very upset if I were him too, if I had done something that was illegal and it didn't pay off. So he has every reason to now feel like he should be issuing all the phony tweets that he issued, all the lies that he told today.
Lisa Graves, you know Lindsey Graham, you worked with him on the Senate Judiciary Committee. What's your reaction to what we heard from him today after that meeting with Matthew Whitaker?
Well, it was surprising, especially because of what we know about what Mr. Whitaker has said in the past, and what we know from Trump's own tweets about why he wanted to put someone new in at the Justice Department. I'm not sure if Lindsey Graham is telling the truth here. I'm going to hope that he is. And I would hope that Whitaker would know that lying to him to his face would be at his peril. But I think it's hard to tell, given what we know about Trump's intent, which Trump made clear in terms of his efforts to try to obstruct and end this investigation that surrounds him.
Matt Miller, if there was some interference going on already with the special prosecutor's investigation, would you expect to hear something? Would there be some kind of leaked reaction to that, some kind of public resignation? Rod Rosenstein, some signal from Rod Rosenstein? What do you think would be the first indicator that Matthew Whitaker is interfering?
I think it would depend on the level of the interference. If, for say, Matthew Whitaker was willing to do something that was just a complete inappropriate interference, let's say there were indictments that had been returned under seal, and he, ordered the special counsel to dismiss those indictments with no cause at all, I think you would see resignations over that. If it's something a little more subtle, I think there's less likely to be those type of mass protests, maybe not even leaks. And I think what you see already is even without Matt Whitaker taking direct steps, I think you'll see the president respond to the fact that he's more confident he has someone who will block Mueller from taking aggressive steps right away in his answers to these questions. I think the president, I think you're right, Lawrence, what you said in your intro. I think the act of having to sit down and answer those questions is likely to get under the president's skin. But I bet what we're going to find is that he actually isn't in any real legal jeopardy, because he now knows that he has an attorney general who's very unlikely to approve a subpoena. And so he now looks at these questions very differently, he and his legal team. They know they can blow questions off. They don't have to answer some of them, because the leverage the special counsel had to enforce compliance has now been taken away.
Jill, Matthew Whitaker is surrounded all day, every day by experienced FBI agents, experienced federal prosecutors at the highest level of the Justice Department, all of whom have reason to treat him like a potential criminal suspect on an obstruction of justice case, based on his own public comments before he ever was installed in this position. I would assume that they are all, at the end of every conversation with him, going back to their desks and writing James Comey-style notes of every word that he has said to them. I can't imagine that he is sitting in there not knowing that, and that wouldn't be extremely inhibiting for him, no matter what he thought he might be willing to do before he sat in that office.
I think you are right on target, and he is someone who really needs to recuse himself. We haven't heard yet what the ethics advice he's getting is, But he is not only conflicted because of his prejudgment of the evidence, and not only because he said that the investigation is a hoax and a witch hunt, but because he himself may be a witness. Aside from his relationship to Sam Clovis, he's been meeting with people in the West Wing. He's been possibly meeting with the president. He's been possibly meeting with White House counsel. He possibly has been giving information to the White House that he has gathered as the assistant, as a chief of staff to the Attorney General. And that makes him a witness as well as a potential target for obstruction himself. So he is really conflicted, and he's also conflicted because he is the subject possibly of an investigation about the company he's been on the board of that's been accused of scamming people out of a lot of money. So there's no reason why he shouldn't feel that every word he speaks is being monitored and reported, and that should inhibit him. But people forget about that. I mean, in the same way that Nixon forgot that he was taping himself and that he should be careful what he was saying in the Oval Office, he went right ahead and said things like, go ahead and pay $1 million. I know where we could get it. So you do think people forget these things and they just go ahead and say what they want.
Criminals always surprise you. The Senator Jeff Flake has now just blocked any possible judicial confirmations in the Senate Judiciary Committee because Mitch McConnell is not giving him a vote on the so-called Protect Mueller bill that has bipartisan support and was passed by the Judiciary Committee. It's ready on the floor to be voted on. Let's listen to what Chuck Grassley, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, said about that today.
What do you make of Senator Flake saying that he's going to vote against judicial nominees until he gets a vote on the Mueller protection bill?
Since that bill came out of committee, I think it's legitimate that the bill be brought up. I don't think it's going to do any good or any harm. And if it satisfies, it'd satisfy me if it became law, because I voted for it.
Lisa Graves, it sounds like Chuck Grassley would just as soon get the Jeff Flake problem solved by having a vote in the Senate on this Protect Mueller bill.
That's right. That's interesting, given how much protection Grassley gave to Trump over the Kavanaugh nomination. Here you see him singing a different tune and saying that bill should get a vote. I really hope that Jeff Flake exercises his power to deny unanimous consent to those judges until there is a vote on this measure. This is a really important measure in defense of the rule of law, and I'm glad to see that there are some Republicans as well as Democrats standing together to say this thing needs a vote and it needs to be enforced in order to protect the integrity of this investigation, because really what's at stake here is whether the president is above the law, is basically going to be allowed to act like a king, or whether we're going to enforce the rule of law. And the Senate holds in its power the power to affect that, as long as Mitch McConnell gets out of the way.
And Matt Miller, Lindsey Graham also said today he'd be perfectly ready to vote for the bill on the Senate floor because he voted for it in committee. But Grassley said a very interesting thing in the middle of that quote where he said, I don't think it will do any good or any harm. And one reason why it might not do any good is the bill still allows for the firing of Robert Mueller. It just establishes an appeals process where Robert Mueller could appeal that action.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the other reason this is kind of an easy thing for Chuck Grassley to say is that he knows that even if the Senate were to take this bill up and pass it, there's no way the House is going to take this bill up as long as it's under Republican control, which it is for the next month and a half. And, of course, there's no way the president would sign it. But I will say there is some utility to this effort, even if, bringing up the bill, pushing it through, even if it doesn't make it into law. There's utility in this effort in the same way there's utility in Jerry Nadler, the incoming chairman in the House of the Judiciary Committee, telling Matt Whitaker that he's, looking over his shoulder and is going to subpoena, investigate the way that he was appointed and whether he interferes with the Mueller investigation. All of these things are inhibiting. In the same way, the culture at DOJ of compliance with the rule of law and compliance with norms, and Whitaker knowing that people are watching him, knowing that people on the Hill are watching, has that same effect. There's no perfect solution here. The perfect solution is the president shouldn't be appointing an attorney general whose sole qualification for the job is a publicly stated hostility to an investigation into the president. We don't have a way to remove him from that job. So we have all these, the attack on the constitutionality, the calls for recusal, this Protect Mueller bill. We're looking at trying to, kind of cobble together different solutions when in reality the kind of entire political system is failing us to some extent when the president feels he has the leeway to make such a kind of out-of-bounds appointment in the first place.
And once again, when asked a question today about the Whitaker situation, Donald Trump has Robert Mueller on the brain. He was asked about his thinking about the Attorney General position, meaning, have you thought of who you actually want to nominate to be the next Attorney General, given that Matthew Whitaker is just the so-called acting Attorney General? The Daily Caller, a softball interview, they said, could you tell us where your thinking is currently on the Attorney General position? And Donald Trump immediately says, Whitaker is just somebody that's very respected. I knew him only as he pertained, as he was with Jeff Sessions. And, look, as far as I'm concerned, this is an investigation that should have never been brought. It should have never been had. It's something that should have never been brought. It's an illegal investigation. And Jill Wine-Banks, no one asked him about the investigation, but as soon as you mention Attorney General, as soon as you mention his thinking about Attorney General, he's thinking about the Mueller investigation and saying it's an illegal investigation that never should have been brought.
Exactly. Well, first of all, methinks thou dost protest too much, Donald Trump, and that it's time to stop blaming everybody else and protesting this. I'm tired, as I'm sure you are, of hearing it's a witch hunt, it's a hoax, and all of the other things that he's saying, the no collusion. These are things that are simply not true. We know how many indictments have been brought. We know what's going on, and it's time for him to stop blaming Hillary. I don't want to hear him say her name again.
Oh, I'm sorry,
the presidency.
Jill. You're going to hear him say her name again. I'm sorry.
I guess so, but I don't like it.
Jill Wine-Banks, Lisa Graves, Matt Miller, thank you very much for starting us off tonight. Really appreciate it. And when we come back, we'll have